All right, happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk Tuesdays. I'm your host, Sebastian Boyer, the approved guy. God bless you, and thank you for joining me today. What a crazy day. I have been busy at work, just helping folks getting access to their business financing, building business credit, velocity banking, infinite banking, the whole nine, everything that we talk about on the channel. That's what I actually do all day long. And so sorry for being 2 minutes late, but I'm here and let's rock and roll. So today's topic for our Bible study is, what are the 3 secrets to success in life and in business? So the first secret is prayer, guys. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, this is awesome. It says, "But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." So we're not to, it's nice to go and publicly pray and be in a crowd, go to church and pray with everybody. But these are the words of Jesus here. And Jesus tells us that when we pray, that we need to go into our room, shut the door, and pray in secret. We don't need to go post on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok or any other social media about our prayer and, oh, I just finished praying. And that's a secret. That's something we're supposed to keep quiet and secret. It's between me and God. It's between you and the Father. And when you do that, what you do in secret, He will reward you. All right, so that's the first secret, which is to pray in secret. And by praying in secret, you will be rewarded. The second secret is to fast. And again, Matthew chapter 6, verse 18. Actually, I think that's verse 8. Sorry, guys. "That your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." So when you fast, before this, it says don't complain, don't go out, don't fast and then go out there and talk about it. And, oh, I'm fasting right now, and oh, I'm so righteous and holy and good. No, you're supposed to stay quiet. Don't tell anybody you're fasting. Don't talk about it. Don't let anyone even know. Your face shouldn't tell. You might be suffering in agonizing pain because you're starving and you're hungry and you're not used to it, but you should be smiling. And everyone should think that you're doing great because it's a secret. It's not, your fast is not supposed to be something you publicly display and promote. Again, going on social media and telling everybody about your fast, right? And I'm not talking about, intermittent fasting for your health and your diet. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a fast consecrated unto the Lord, where you either fast from eating. It could be a liquid fast. It could be the Daniel fast. It could be where you fast from watching TV. It could be a fast from entertainment or pleasure of some sort. But you sacrifice something, and you don't complain about it. You don't talk about it. You don't tell anybody about it. You keep it quiet. It's quiet. It's personal, right? And that fast is going to be a blessing to you because it's a secret, okay? The next one is giving. And again, Matthew chapter 6, verse 4. "But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Amazing. So the third secret is giving. These are 3 things that God tells us to do in secret, which He sees in secret. and he will reward you in secret. So don't tell everybody about what you did when you gave to the needy. You don't need to go blast it on your social media about how great you are because you're giving to people, and document your giving so that everybody sees how wonderful of a giver you are. When you give, give in secret. Now, as I continued this study, what I came to find is that there were 3 sins, which in 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, John kind of suggests that these 3 sins kind of sum up all sins. So all sins kind of are in these 3 sins. You can look in through the lens of these 3. Basically, all sin is inside of this, and that is that for all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, that's 1, and the desires of the eyes, that's 2, and the pride of life, that's 3. These are not from the Father, but they are from the world. The desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 through 6, this is where Eve is being tempted. And it says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?' And the woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die.'" The next line, or the next verse, "You will not certainly die." So the devil's lying to her now. "The serpent said to the woman, 'For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.'" So when the woman she saw the fruit of the tree and that it was good for food. So she was thinking about eating. It was good for food. That's the diet. That's the flesh. That's the appetite. That's number 1. It was pleasing to her eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom. Those are the 3 sins right there. She saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, desires of the flesh. That could be our appetite for food, our lust and appetite for sex, our appetite for anything that pleases the flesh. It was pleasing to the eye, which is the second sin, the desire of the eye. What the eye sees, it wants, it desires more of. Whether it's what you see that other people have, including cars, houses, and money. And then finally, the desire for gaining wisdom, which is the pride of life. To have more knowledge and to be boastful about what you have and what you know above and beyond everybody else. Now watch this. Could it be that the 3 secrets, fasting, giving, and prayer, could it be that these 3 secrets cancel the 3 sins? Could it be that fasting cancels, or at least helps to cancel, the desire of the flesh? Because by fasting, your mind gains control over your body, over your flesh, and your flesh desires, which include your desire for eating food, your desire for sex, your desire for anything that is pleasure to the flesh, to the body. Fasting helps your mind to control that. And when you're fasting unto God, it's not just your mind, but it's the Holy Spirit that is helping you as well. So could it be that fasting cancels the desires of the flesh? Could it be? Could it be that giving cancels the desires of the eyes? We don't know anything except for what we see and hear. And what we see is what we desire. So when we want more than what we have, it's because we see that others have it. Otherwise, we wouldn't desire it. And that includes the money that we have. Could it be that by giving, It cancels the desires of the eyes. It cancels our feeling like we are lacking what others have, and the desire to hoard money or to love money. Could it be that giving cancels the desire of the eyes? And then could it be that prayer cancels the desire or the pride of life? So as we saw, Eve went through those three things. That was right there on when she was tempted. That's what she experienced. Right? So it's amazing that in the New Testament, in 1 John, he points those out. And then it's amazing that Jesus in Matthew now tells us that these three things, if done in secret, will be a blessing, and that God will reward you because God sees it in secret. So when you pray, pray in secret. That's between you and God. But make sure you pray. Make sure that every day you're spending some time praying. Guys, it's not about how much time we spend praying. It's about being consistent and doing it every day. So whether you have 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour, make sure that you are consistently making your time to pray every day. And make sure that every time you get a nudge from God to give or you gain money, I can't tell you whether or not you should tithe or whether or not tithing is a requirement or a mandate. That's kind of a personal thing based on your interpretation of Scripture. But I can tell you that when you tithe, something happens where your desire for that money, your feeling of control and ownership of that money, you let go of it and you give it to God. And it forces you to trust God and that He's going to do more with your little than you could do with your more. So by giving in secret, you don't need to tell anyone about it. You will be blessed if your heart's in the right place. And then fasting in secret, you will be blessed. So I hope this blesses you. I hope this, because as I studied this, it really made me realize, that these three things specifically are told to us by Jesus to be done in secret. And if we do these things in secret, we will be rewarded outwardly. Next week, we will be going over business lessons from the book of Job. My daughter loves the book of Job, and she literally asked me if I would do this. So this is for my daughter, Alana. We were going to be doing a study of the business lessons from the book of Job, which is a challenge for me because I've never approached the book of Job from a business perspective. I've looked at Solomon that way, and I've looked at Genesis that way, but I never looked at Job that way. So it's going to be fun. I look forward to going over that information with you guys next week. So first, before we continue, I just want to say hi to everyone that's joining me online now. If you're joining, Wendy, thank you so much for consistently committing to be here with me. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Anyone else that might be watching, please make sure you like. Please make sure you subscribe and share, and just say hi on the comments. Let me know that you're there. Please, just interact. Just say hi so I know that you're there, and I'd love to give you a shout out. So now we're going to transition to the next portion of our teaching, which is going to be our business topic for the day. And our business topic for the day is asset protection versus estate planning. All right. There we go. Sorry, guys. There we go. All right. So asset protection versus estate planning. What's the difference between an asset protection trust versus an estate planning trust? Okay. Now, before I continue, I am not an attorney. This is not legal advice. This is just research I've done. But later on, after the live stream, I'm going to be updating the description on the video, and I'll be adding some links to a asset protection attorney group as well as an estate planning attorney group. So it's not there now. Unfortunately, I was scrambling just to make this get here to be with you guys today, so I was unable to prepare that. But I will add it later, so please look out for it. If you don't see it now, come back later. You'll see it in the description below on the YouTube. Okay, so what is the difference between asset protection trust and versus an estate planning trust? So first, an estate planning trust, which is often simply referred to as a trust, is a legal arrangement that allows individuals, which would be the grantor or settlor, to transfer their assets, such as property, investments, and cash, to a trust entity for the benefit of specific individuals or organizations. The beneficiaries, which are the beneficiaries. The primary purpose of an estate planning trust is to manage and distribute assets according to the grantor's wishes, while potentially minimizing estate taxes, probate costs, and ensuring efficient asset management. There are several types of estate planning trusts, each designed to serve different purposes and provide specific benefits, including a revocable living trust, an irrevocable trust, charitable remainder trust, special needs trust, testamentary trust, qualified personal residence trust, generation skipping trust, and a family limited partnership or family limited liability company trust. In most cases, for estate planning, what you're going to see that most attorneys advise that people use is going to be a revocable living trust. And so I'm going to specifically just talk about that in terms of an estate planning trust. This trust allows the grantor to maintain control of their assets during their lifetime while specifying how those assets should be managed and distributed after their death. It can help avoid probate, providing a smoother and more private transition of assets to beneficiaries. So if you don't know what probate is, folks, when you and I can only speak for the U.S., the United States of America, because I'm only familiar with how it works here, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be similar in other countries. So of course, do your diligence on that. But in the U.S., if you don't have a will and testament that specifically tells the government where or who is going to receive your assets upon your demise, on your death, then basically the government has 100% right to seize your assets, and it belongs to the government. So just like in a kingdom where the king owns everything, essentially this democracy that we apparently have is a kingdom because the government controls everything and owns all of your assets unless you've clearly defined that in a will and testament. Now, if all you have is a will and testament, then that will and testament goes to probate court. Probate court is going to cost your heirs, who are the beneficiaries or the people that you are leaving your assets to, it's going to cost them money, it's going to cost them time, and it could be wrapped up in probate for months or years even, depending on if you have sibling rivalry in your from your children trying to get access to your assets, or even worse, if your children are being contested by different relatives who want to care for your children. So in your will and testament, you define who gets what, but it goes to probate. And then while it's in probate, these things are in limbo, and it's going to cost time and money. And so to avoid probate, you set up a trust, an estate planning trust, and most people will set up a revocable living trust. These trusts can cost anywhere between $500 to $700 for a couple. Now, if you go directly to an attorney on a private level, they might charge $2,000 to $10,000. The resource I'm going to provide later on in the description is only charging $600 for a couple to create a revocable living trust. Now, it's important to note that a revocable living trust, the word revocable means that you can make changes to it. And it's living, meaning while you're alive, you can make changes. So that means if you put your assets inside of a revocable living trust while you're alive, it does not necessarily protect those assets from any litigation or lawsuits because it's a revocable living trust. A judge could require and demand that you make changes to the trust and award assets to a plaintiff. So it's important to note that you have to distinguish the difference between an estate planning trust using a revocable living trust and an asset protection trust, which we're going to talk about in a moment, which would be done with an irrevocable living trust. So now, while you're living, your assets are in the trust, but they're not necessarily protected while you're alive. So if you're a typical person with maybe a house, a car or two, and some expensive luxury items, a revocable living trust is probably standard for everybody. Your likelihood of getting a lawsuit is going to be low because you're not actively owning and you're not an active entrepreneur where you're expanding your assets and your net worth through multiple properties and multiple assets where you have a risk of someone coming after you aggressively, right? So for most of us, an estate planning trust or a revocable living trust is going to do the job. What eventually will happen is when your time comes and you pass away, then the attorney that's in charge of the trust is going to immediately change it into a irrevocable trust. So the process is instant. From the moment you die, your attorney changes the revocable living trust into a irrevocable trust. They assign an EIN or a tax ID number to it, so then it becomes irrevocable, and then the assets are now protected. Again, it avoids probate, and this is also a way that you can also avoid any certain taxes, especially on properties, because that property, that asset, is not being transferred. The title is not moving from one person's hand to the next person's hand. It stays in the trust. So the trust owns the asset, and then the trustee changes from you to the beneficiary of the trust, who now is the trustee and has access to the assets inside the trust. So if there's any taxes that would normally be in place when you transfer ownership of an asset, because that asset has gained value over time. If you bought a property for 150,000 10 years ago and now it's worth 400,000, there's going to be a capital gains tax that the person that inherits that property will have to pay. But because the trust owns the property, the person that inherits that property is now a trustee. The trust owns the property, and you avoid that capital gains tax. So you avoid probate, you avoid capital gains, protects the assets after your death through a revocable living trust, which is a standard typical estate planning trust. Now, a proper estate planning trust is not just going to include your assets. There's going to be about 7 or 8 legal filings and documents that go into that, including the will and testament go into that, including your medical requests, whether you want to stay alive if you're in the ICU or in the emergency room. So there's a long list of items there. Forgive me, I didn't prepare that list to read to you, but again, on the link I'm going to provide you, you can do all the research you want to learn more about a revocable living trust and take advantage of an attorney service that will provide you that for about $600 for a couple. I think it's $500 for one individual. Okay, before I move on to talk about an estate planning trust or an asset protection trust, before I move on to talk about an asset protection trust, I see you have a question, Wendy, so let me read that out. Wendy asked, my mom has a house in her name, alone, she's 80. I'm not sure how to get beneficiaries and will done since she is now diagnosed with dementia. Okay. her property is worth $800,000. So yeah, definitely, Wendy, you should by this point with that situation have a power of attorney over your mom's assets and estate. If not, then you should be able to get that as part of a medical directive, since she's incapable of caring for herself. And in that case, you should be able to set up a trust for her and then move her assets into a trust. I am not 100% sure if the company I'm going to refer, which is Trust and Will, it's going to be in the link in the description. Just come back later, please, and wait for that so that that you can use the link in my that I provide you, and ultimately they'll be able to answer your questions and see if they can assist you in Canada. If not, then I'll see if I could find another resource for you. All right, sorry, so let's move on now. So now we're going to talk about an asset protection trust. So an asset protection trust is a type of irrevocable trust designed primarily to protect a person's assets from creditors and legal claims while allowing them to retain some degree of control and benefit from those assets. The primary goal of this type of trust is to shield assets from potential financial threats such as lawsuits, bankruptcy, or creditors seeking repayment. Asset protection trusts are often used as a strategy for safeguarding wealth for future generations or for individuals with high-risk professions. So the key characteristics of an irrevocable trust or an asset protection trust is, number one, it's irrevocable. So that means that the asset protection trusts are typically irrevocable, meaning that once assets are transferred into the trust, the grantor gives up control over them and cannot change the terms of the trust or reclaim the assets. Now, there is a caveat to that, because you can request and pay the attorney that controls the trust to make changes. So there are changes that can be done. You just can't do it directly. Where in a revocable trust that we just talked about, it's a lot easier for you to make those changes. You don't need the blessing of the attorney to do it for you. You can make those changes, and ultimately the attorney does it, but you don't have to. They don't have to approve it. They do what you ask them to do in a revocable trust. And an irrevocable trust, they will have to approve it and accept it and issue it for you. But generally speaking, it's irrevocable. The point of it is that it's not going to change. Okay. Independence. These trusts often require an independent trustee or trustee who is not the grantor. This helps ensure that the trust is not viewed as a sham or fraudulent attempt to protect assets. Duration. Asset protection trusts can have a specific duration after which the assets are distributed to the beneficiaries, or they can be perpetual, continuing for multiple generations. Spendthrift provisions. These trusts may include spendthrift provisions which restrict the ability of creditors to access the trust assets. This means that creditors typically cannot compel the trustee to distribute assets to satisfy debts of the grantor. Jurisdiction. Asset protection trusts are often established in jurisdictions with favorable trust laws known as offshore jurisdiction or domestic asset protection trust jurisdictions. These jurisdictions may have laws that make it more challenging for creditors to access trusts in assets in the trust. So that is so crucial, because there's only one or two states in the U.S. that are favorable for in terms of jurisdiction. But even in those states, even though it is an irrevocable trust, a judge can still penetrate a domestic asset protection trust in most states, and it becomes more difficult in one or two specific states. But when you move jurisdiction out of the United States into certain countries, and so some of them are islands like the Bahamas and Nevis Islands, the jurisdictions and the law changes, and it becomes very difficult, almost impossible or impenetrable for any third party to sue or get access to your assets in an offshore trust, right? Now, for this type of a trust, it's a completely different ballgame. We're talking about minimum $5,000-$10,000 up to $30,000. Again, I'm not the attorney providing the service. I'm going to provide the link. Now, this is going to be a separate attorney group that does the asset protection trust. And again, this is going to be more for so if you are someone who has assets, like millions of dollars of assets that you want to protect, especially when you have real estate assets and businesses where somebody can slip and fall and then they turn around and try to sue you and try to seize your assets. Another way to protect assets that's not mentioned and has nothing to, it's separate from the trust, is really by just separating asset and ownership of assets through LLCs. So in some states like Florida, an LLC will protect your assets from litigation. But if you have all your assets in one LLC, then your assets in that LLC could be sued. Where if you separate ownership of assets amongst different LLCs. So, for example, if you're a real estate investor and you own multiple real estate properties, it's a good idea to establish an LLC for each property. So therefore, if someone slips and falls, if you have 10 properties and someone slips and falls in one of those properties, they cannot sue you for any of the properties that are in control by other LLCs. They can only go after the assets in that one particular LLC. And then, of course, that LLC will protect your personal assets. So your primary residence and other personal assets wouldn't be accessible through, because that LLC protects it. So the LLC will protect your personal assets. It'll separate that. And if you set up a separate LLC for each company, it will then separate the assets and make it more difficult for anyone to sue you for assets in each one of those LLCs, if that makes sense. Now, an asset protection trust is another layer on top of the LLC to add more protection if you're at that level where you need that type of protection. The last key characteristic of the asset protection trust is fraudulent transfer laws, which is transferring assets into an asset protection trust with the intent to defraud creditors is illegal and can result in legal consequences. Asset protection trusts must be established for legitimate estate planning and asset protection purposes. As well as there's creditor statute of limitation. In some jurisdictions, there may be a statute of limitations on creditors' ability to challenge asset transfers to an asset protection trust. Once a certain period has passed, the assets in the trust may be less vulnerable to creditor claims. Disclaimer: it is important to note that asset protection trusts are not foolproof and their effectiveness can vary depending on the jurisdiction and specific circumstances. Laws related to asset protection trusts differ from place to place, and their legality and protection levels can change over time. Additionally, using asset protection trusts solely for the purpose of avoiding existing debts or legal obligations may be subject to legal challenges. Asset protection trusts should be established with the assistance of an experienced legal and financial professional who are knowledgeable about the laws and regulations governing trust in the relevant jurisdictions. They can help you create a trust structure that aligns with your asset protection goals while ensuring compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Again, I am not an attorney, and this information is not meant to represent legal counsel. I will be providing links in the description for legal firms that can assist you, one for estate planning as well as one for asset protection. So make sure you submit your request for an estate planning trust or an asset protection trust below. You'll see that link in just a bit. As now we're gonna go ahead and transition to our subscriber appreciation, where you have the opportunity to promote your business. So all you have to do is subscribe to the channel. You just have to like 3 of the videos, and you'll see a link in the description below to schedule a call for a quick interview, so that we can then schedule you for an interview on the channel. Unfortunately, tonight, let me change that. There we go. Unfortunately, tonight, guys, my guest last minute had to opt out, so I don't have a guest to be interviewed for the night. It was just the last minute. They could not make it, and I could not find someone to replace them last minute. And rather than pretending and playing back an interview that I have, which I do have other interviews recorded that I could have played back, I decided just to be honest and tell you that I don't have a guest tonight. So that's okay. We will have a guest next week, and hopefully we'll be able to represent, as always, the kingdom of God on earth. So please make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Please come back next week. And I look forward to chopping it up with you guys on the business lessons through the book of Job. God bless you. Take great care. And have a great night.